It started on a quiet weekend when my father had gone out of town for a business trip. The house felt unusually empty, and I was lying on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when a message appeared. It was from my father's old friend, Mr. Ryan. He had known me since I was a child, always kind, always polite in a way that made me feel seen. His message was simple. He asked if I could stop by his house to help him with some papers he couldn't understand. I didn't think much of it. He had always been like family, and I agreed. When I reached his home later that evening, I noticed how peaceful the neighborhood was. His house stood slightly apart from the others, surrounded by trees, with a dim golden light glowing through the curtains. He opened the door before I could even ring the bell, smiling warmly as always. "I'm glad you came," he said softly, his voice carrying a tone I couldn't quite read. Inside, everything was neatly arranged, quiet, almost too quiet. He guided me to the living room, offering tea before we began going through the papers on the table. As we talked, I noticed small things I had never paid attention to before: the way he paused between sentences, the way his eyes lingered when I laughed. There was something deeper in his expressions, a mix of affection and hesitation. At first, I brushed it off as simple kindness. But as time passed, I started to sense something more, something he wasn't saying out loud. He asked about my father, about how things were between us. I told him the truth, that we rarely talked anymore. My father was always distant, busy with work, and our home felt like a place of silence. Mr. Ryan listened quietly, nodding slowly, as if he understood more than he let on. Then he began to talk about his own life, how loneliness can grow inside even the happiest homes, how years can pass while your heart remains untouched. His words carried a weight I could feel in the air between us. The conversation drifted from casual talk to something more personal. He told me how he had spent years pretending to be someone he wasn't, how sometimes people hide their truths to protect others, not realizing they are breaking themselves in the process. His tone was calm, almost sad, and I didn't know what to say. I just listened. There was a long silence after that. The only sound was the clock ticking and the faint noise of rain beginning outside. Then he looked up at me and said, "Let's talk in the other room. It's quieter there." He led me down a short hallway toward a room at the back of the house. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing a smaller space filled with books, photographs, and a faint scent of old paper. It felt personal, almost sacred, as if I had stepped into a part of his life he rarely showed anyone. He motioned for me to sit. My heartbeat was louder than I wanted it to be. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me feel like he was about to tell me something important. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping gently on the windows. I could sense that whatever he was about to say would change how I saw him forever, and as he finally took a slow breath, closing the door softly behind us, I realized this was not just a visit. It was the beginning of something neither of us had expected. The air inside that room felt heavier than before, filled with the quiet hum of rain and the soft ticking of a wall clock. I sat there, unsure of what to expect, as Mr. Ryan walked over to the window and stood for a while, his back to me. When he finally turned around, his face looked older, tired, but calm in a way that came from accepting long-kept truths. That he began to speak slowly, not looking directly at me at first. He said he had known my father for more than 20 years, that they had once been closer than most people ever knew. Over time, their friendship had turned into something complicated, something that neither of them could define or even speak about in those days. Then life happened: marriage, children, responsibilities, the need to appear normal. He said all this quietly, as though each word cost him a little piece of himself. I didn't know how to react. Hearing those things about my father was strange, like finding a secret room in a house you've lived in your whole life. Mr. Ryan smiled faintly, not out of pride, but sadness. He told me he wasn't here to defend himself or to justify anything. He just needed to tell someone the truth before it became too heavy to carry. He sat across from me, his hands folded on his knees. "I invited you here because I see in you the same silence that once lived in me," he said. "You wear it well, but I know what it means. It's loneliness." I didn't answer, but something in his words felt true. There were days I felt invisible, even when surrounded by people. He went on to talk about how pretending to be someone you're not is its own kind of betrayal, not of others, but of your own heart. He said he'd spent years trapped between the image the world expected and the truth he felt inside. "I've lived a life of infidelity," he admitted softly, "but not just to people. I'd been unfaithful to myself. His voice cracked slightly, and for the first time I saw a tear slide down his cheek. It wasn't the tear of guilt, but of release. I felt an ache in my chest, a mixture of pity, respect, and something unexplainable. I told him that everyone hides a part of themselves. Maybe the world makes it too hard to live honestly. Yet he nodded, eyes still on the floor. That's what I mean, he said. We spend our lives asking for acceptance but forget to accept ourselves first. The conversation grew deeper, softer. He talked about love, how it isn't always romantic, how sometimes it's simply the connection between two people who see each other clearly for the first time. He said that the purest form of love is understanding, even if it exists for a brief moment and then fades away. I realized then that he hadn't brought me here for confession or forgiveness. He wanted connection, the simple relief of being seen. And somehow, I understood. The loneliness in his eyes mirrored something in me I had never admitted out loud. For a long time, we sat in silence, listening to the rain. There was no need for more words. He looked lighter, almost peaceful, as though speaking had freed him from something invisible. When he finally spoke again, his tone was steady but full of quiet emotion. I don't expect you to understand everything, he said. I just needed someone to know who I really am. I nodded. In that moment, I did understand, maybe not his entire story, but the feeling of living behind walls, of carrying secrets that shape you. The rain outside began to slow, the last drop sliding down the glass like fading memories. Mr. Ryan stood up and opened the door again, letting the faint light from the hallway spill into the room. He smiled, gentle, grateful, human. Thank you for listening, he said simply, and just like that, the tension that had filled the air began to fade. We stepped back into the quiet of the living room, both changed in ways neither of us could quite explain. The next morning, I woke up to a strange silence in the house. My sister wasn't in her room, and the kitchen was empty. When I went downstairs, I found her sitting in the living room, her face pale and her eyes swollen. She didn't greet me the way she usually did. Instead, she looked at me for a moment and then turned away. Something felt wrong. I sat beside her and asked what had happened. She didn't answer immediately. After a long pause, she said, I know you've been spending a lot of time with Abba. Her voice trembled slightly. People in this house have started talking. I was shocked. For a few seconds, I couldn't even speak. I told her that nothing inappropriate had happened, that we were only sorting old photographs and talking about memories. But she didn't look convinced. She stood up and said, Ariba, I don't know what your intentions are, but this doesn't look right. You don't understand how people think. Her words cut deep. I felt hurt that my own sister could doubt me. I tried to explain that Mr. Rahman had only shared his memories, and that all I had done was listen with respect. But the more I spoke, the less she seemed to believe me. Later that day, I went to my room and stayed there quietly. I could hear voices from the hallway, my sister's, her husband's, and then Mr. Rahman's. The tone was calm but heavy, like everyone was trying not to let the conversation turn into a fight. After a while, there was silence again. In the evening, Mr. Rahman came to my door and gently knocked. I didn't open it right away, but he said softly, Ariba, I'm sorry if my actions have caused any discomfort between you and your sister. His voice carried genuine sadness. I opened the door, and he stood there, looking older than before. He said, I never meant to create misunderstanding. I only found peace in remembering my past through your kindness. You reminded me of my daughter. She used to listen to me the same way. His words filled my eyes with tears. For a moment, I felt how much pain he had been hiding behind his calmness. I told him that I understood and that he didn't need to apologize. But he shook his head and said, sometimes, even when we mean well, the world chooses to see it differently. That's the nature of life. His words stayed with me long after he left that night. My sister came into my room. She looked tired and guilty. She sat beside me and said, maybe I overreacted, but you don't understand how it feels to see my father-in-law talk so openly with someone else. I thought you were replacing me. I was surprised by her confession. I realized that her jealousy wasn't about mistrust, it came from insecurity, from the distance she felt in her own home. I held her hand and said, you haven't lost anyone, Sana. You just stopped seeing the love that's still around you. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she hugged me. The air between us softened, but the pain still lingered. When we came downstairs later, Mr. Rahman was sitting quietly, reading a book. He looked up, smiled faintly, and asked if everything was fine. My sister nodded but didn't say much. There was peace in the silence, though it felt fragile, like a wound slowly beginning to heal. That night, I sat on the balcony again, staring at the stars. I thought about everything that had happened, the misunderstandings, the hurt, the loneliness. I realized how quickly people can twist something pure into something doubtful. Sometimes love is not about romance or attraction, it's about the quiet understanding that connects two lonely hearts. Before sleeping, I whispered to myself, maybe betrayal doesn't always come from actions. Sometimes it comes from how easily we stop believing in each other. The thought stayed with me until morning, like a quiet ache that refused to fade. The next morning, the house felt calm again, as if the storm from the day before had finally passed. My sister was kinder, quieter, and more thoughtful than usual. When I came down for breakfast, she had already set the table. She smiled faintly and said, "Let's not hold on to things that hurt." Her words were simple, but I could feel the sincerity in them. I nodded, grateful that the tension between us had started to fade. Mr. Rahman entered the room a few minutes later. He greeted us politely, the same calmness in his voice as always. But I could sense something different about him. He looked peaceful, but there was also a kind of distance in his eyes, as if he had already made a decision in his heart. After breakfast, he asked me to come to the study once more. When I entered, the room was filled with the soft light of morning. On the table lay a single envelope with my name on it. He said, "I wanted to give this to you before you leave. It's just a letter." His voice was steady but emotional. I hesitated, not knowing what to say. He smiled and continued, "You've reminded me of things I thought I'd forgotten, the value of kindness, the comfort of being heard. Don't let this world take that away from you." I thanked him, not realizing how much those words would stay with me. Before I could say more, he excused himself and left the room. I opened the envelope and found a handwritten letter inside. In it, he wrote about how loneliness can sometimes make people look for meaning in unexpected places, and how my kindness had brought warmth back into his life. He ended the letter by saying, "Never let anyone make you doubt your intentions. True hearts are often misunderstood." Reading those words made my eyes well up. I folded the letter carefully and kept it in my bag, knowing it would always remind me that goodness doesn't need to be explained, it only needs to be felt. Later that day, I told my sister that I was leaving. She hugged me tightly, apologizing for her words and thanking me for coming. "Maybe I needed you to remind me what really matters," she said. I smiled and told her to take care of herself and her home. When I went to say goodbye to Mr. Rahman, he simply raised his hand in blessing and said, "May peace follow you wherever you go." As I sat in the car on my way back home, I kept thinking about everything that had happened. The house, once filled with silence and distance, had taught me something valuable, that not every story of love has to be romantic. Sometimes, love is found in understanding, forgiveness, and compassion. Days passed, and life slowly returned to normal. But sometimes, when I looked at the letter, I remembered the feeling of that quiet house, the heaviness in its walls, and the people trying to heal behind them. I realized that betrayal doesn't always mean breaking promises, sometimes it means breaking trust, even unintentionally. And love isn't always about closeness, sometimes it's about giving someone the strength to move on. The story that began with confusion ended with understanding. I had gone to my sister's house thinking I would bring her comfort, but instead, I learned how fragile relationships can be and how easily emotions can be misunderstood. As I looked out the window, the sunlight falling softly on my face, I whispered to myself, some stories don't end with love or loss, they end with lessons. And with that thought, I closed my eyes, thankful that even in the midst of misunderstanding, kindness had found its place.